Jake Morrison stood in the empty kitchen of his grandmother's old farmhouse and tried to remember how to breathe without thinking about the war. 3 years of fighting aliens in space had left him with hands that shook when he wasn't busy, and dreams that made him wake up screaming. The doctors at the military hospital said he had something called PTSD, but Jake just called it being broken. The farmhouse sat on 20 acres of Montana grassland, where his grandmother had raised chickens and grown vegetables until she died last winter. Jake had inherited everything, including the big kitchen with its old gas stove and heavy wooden tables. His grandmother had taught him to cook when he was young, and now cooking was the only thing that made his mind quiet. He decided to turn the front part of the house into a diner. The idea came to him while he was making scrambled eggs for breakfast and realized it was the first time in months he hadn't thought about the Battle of Titan Base or the friends who didn't come home. Cooking made sense in a way that nothing else did anymore. Jake spent 2 months fixing up the place. He painted the walls yellow like sunshine and put in new light fixtures and comfortable chairs. He called it Home Base Cafe because it sounded friendly and because he needed somewhere that felt like home. The local people in the small town of Cedar Falls were curious about the veteran who had moved into the old Henderson place and started serving food. The first customers were mostly ranchers and truck drivers who stopped by for coffee and pie. Jake made simple food, but he made it well. His grandmother had taught him that food made with care tasted better than fancy cooking made without love. The scrambled eggs were fluffy, and the coffee was strong, and the apple pie tasted like it came from someone's kitchen instead of a factory. Business was slow but steady. Jake liked the quiet routine of opening at 6 in the morning and closing at 8 at night. He liked talking to the regular customers about the weather and local news instead of military operations and casualty reports. Cedar Falls was the kind of place where people knew each other's names and helped their neighbors when trouble came. On a Tuesday evening in late September, it started raining hard just before closing time. Jake was cleaning the grill when he heard someone knocking on the front door. He almost didn't answer because he had already turned the sign to closed, but something about the desperate sound of the knocking made him walk over and look through the window. A woman stood on his porch in the rain. She was soaked through and shivering and looked like she hadn't eaten in days. Her dark hair was plastered to her head, and her clothes were torn and dirty. She was probably in her late 20s with olive skin and dark eyes that reminded Jake of someone he couldn't quite remember. Jake opened the door, and the woman looked up at him with an expression of relief and exhaustion that he recognized from his own mirror. "Please," she said, in a voice that had an accent he couldn't place. "I need food and somewhere to stay. I can work for it. I'm a good cook." Every instinct Jake had learned in the military told him to be careful. Strangers showing up at night in small towns usually meant trouble. But there was something about the woman that made him think of all the times he had been hungry and scared and far from home. "Come in before you catch pneumonia," he said and stepped aside. The woman walked into the warm diner and stood dripping on the floor. Jake grabbed some clean dish towels and handed them to her. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elena," she said as she dried her face. "Elena Vasquez. Thank you for letting me in. Most people wouldn't." Jake studied her face in the light. She was pretty, in a quiet way, but there was something hard around her eyes that spoke of bad experiences. She moved like someone who had been trained to fight, and her hands had calluses that came from holding weapons instead of doing farm work. "Are you running from something?" he asked. Elena's jaw tightened. "I'm running to something," she said. "I think I found it." Jake didn't know what that meant, but he recognized the look of someone who needed help. He had worn that look himself when he first came home from the war. "Are you really a good cook?" he asked. Elena nodded. "My grandmother taught me. Traditional recipes from my family." "All right," Jake said. "There's an apartment upstairs. It's not much, but it's clean and warm. You can stay there tonight and we'll figure out the rest tomorrow. But first, let's get some food in you." Jake made Elena a plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes while she sat at the counter and slowly stopped, shivering. She ate like someone who hadn't had a real meal in weeks, but she had good table manners and said thank you after every bite. When she was finished, Jake showed her up to the small apartment above the diner. "The shower works, and there are clean towels in the bathroom," he said. "Lock the door and get some sleep. We'll talk in the morning." Elena turned to him before he left. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Jake thought about all the nights he had wished someone would help him when he was lost and scared. "Because someone should," he said. That night Jake dreamed about battles he had never fought and heard a woman's voice calling his name across a field of stars. When he woke up, he couldn't remember the dream, but he had a strange feeling that Elena Vasquez was going to change everything about his quiet new life in Cedar Falls. Elena was already working in the kitchen when Jake came downstairs at 5:30 in the morning. She had found the ingredients for pancake batter and was mixing it by hand with perfect technique. The coffee was brewing and the grill was heating up. She moved around the kitchen like she had been working there for years instead of sleeping upstairs for one night. "You're up early," Jake said as he tied on his apron. "I don't sleep much," Elena replied without looking up from the batter. "Old habits." Jake wanted to ask what kind of habits kept someone awake at night, but he had his own demons that made sleep difficult. Instead, he started preparing bacon and sausage for the morning rush. Elena worked beside him without getting in his way and somehow anticipated what he needed before he asked for it. The first customers started arriving at 6, and Jake was amazed at how smoothly the kitchen ran with Elena helping. She cooked eggs perfectly and flipped pancakes without breaking them and seemed to know exactly how long to toast bread. The regular customers complimented the food and asked Jake if he had hired a new cook. "She's helping out for a while," Jake said because he didn't know how to explain Elena's situation when he didn't understand it himself. Over the next few weeks, Elena became part of the daily routine at Homebase Cafe. She worked from opening to closing and never seemed to get tired. Jake noticed that she could lift heavy pans and bags of flour that should have been difficult for someone her size. She also never ate during the day, and he never saw her take breaks. The strangest thing was how Elena seemed to know recipes that Jake had never taught her. She made perfect biscuits and gravy using his grandmother's technique and prepared a soup that tasted exactly like something his mother used to make. When Jake asked where she learned to cook, she gave vague answers about growing up in a large family. Elena also knew things about the customers that she shouldn't have known. She remembered their usual orders after meeting them once and somehow knew personal details that Jake had never shared with her. When old Mr. Crawford came in talking about his arthritis acting up, Elena suggested a specific tea blend that helped with joint pain. Crawford was amazed because the tea was something his late wife used to make. The food at Homebase Cafe got better with Elena in the kitchen. She had ideas for new dishes and ways to improve old ones. The apple pie became famous throughout the county, and people started driving from other towns just to eat Elena's cooking. Jake was grateful for the help and the increased business, but he was also curious about Elena's past. She never talked about where she came from or why she had shown up at his door in the rain. When customers asked personal questions, Elena gave polite but empty answers. She said she was from the West Coast and had done restaurant work before but never provided details. Jake respected her privacy because he knew what it was like to have experiences that were too painful to discuss. 3 weeks after Elena arrived, Jake's old squad mate Pete Williams stopped by the diner for lunch. Pete was on leave from his new assignment at the space station and wanted to catch up with his former sergeant. Jake was happy to see his friend, but worried about how Pete would react to Elena. Pete was a good soldier and a loyal friend, but he was also suspicious of strangers. The war had taught all of them to be careful about trusting people they didn't know. Jake introduced Elena as his new cook and helper, but didn't mention how she had arrived or why she was staying. Elena served Pete his burger and fries with a friendly smile. "Thank you for your service, Corporal Williams," she said as she set down his plate. Pete looked up sharply. "I didn't tell you my rank," he said. Elena's face went pale and she took a step back. "I'm sorry," she said. "I must have heard Jake mention it." But Jake knew he had never told Elena about Pete's military service. He had introduced Pete simply as an old friend. Elena excused herself to work in the kitchen while Pete ate his lunch in thoughtful silence. After the lunch rush died down, Pete pulled Jake aside. "We need to talk," he said in a low voice. "Not here." They walked out to Pete's truck and Pete pulled out a military tablet. "I need to show you something," he said as he scrolled through classified files. "This is from the Battle of Kepler Station, 3 years ago." Pete showed Jake a series of photographs taken during the fighting. Most showed destroyed buildings and military equipment, but one image made Jake's heart skip. It was a combat photo showing a human woman fighting alongside alien rebels against the Zephyrian Empire forces. The woman was wearing partial armor and carrying an energy weapon, but her face was clearly visible. She looked exactly like Elena. The intelligence reports said there was a rogue human operative working with the resistance on Kepler, Pete said. "Someone who knew our tactics and was helping the rebels hit our supply lines. Command never figured out who it was." Jake stared at the photograph. The woman's stance and the way she held her weapon showed military training. Her face had the same determined expression Jake had seen on Elena when she concentrated on cooking. "This could be anyone," Jake said, but his voice sounded uncertain even to himself. "Maybe," Pete said. "But there's more. I ran a facial recognition scan through the military database. The system flagged a possible match with Captain Elena Vasquez of the Colonial Marines. She was reported killed in action during the siege of New Damascus." Jake felt cold despite the warm afternoon sun. New Damascus was where his unit had fought some of their worst battles. It was where his commanding officer, Major Ryan Tucker, had died, saving Jake's life during the retreat. "Elena Vasquez was Ryan's fiancée," Jake said quietly. Pete nodded grimly. "Ryan talked about her all the time, showed everyone her picture and made plans for their wedding after the war. But she died 6 months before Ryan did. At least that's what the official report said." Jake looked at the photograph again and remembered Ryan's dying words. The major had grabbed Jake's uniform as medics worked on his injuries and whispered, "Tell Elena I'm sorry," before closing his eyes forever. Jake had never understood what Ryan meant because Elena was supposed to be already dead. "What are you thinking?" Pete asked. Jake closed the tablet and handed it back to his friend. "I'm thinking there's a lot about this war that we were never told," he said. "And I'm thinking Elena needs someone she can trust right now." Pete started his truck engine. "Be careful, Jake. If she really is who I think she is, then there are people looking for her. People who won't care about your diner or this town." After Pete drove away, Jake stood in the parking lot and watched the sun set behind the mountains. Inside the diner, Elena was cleaning tables and humming a tune he didn't recognize. Whatever secrets she was carrying, Jake had already decided to help her keep them. She had found her way to his kitchen for a reason, and he wasn't going to let anyone take her away. That evening, Jake waited until the last customer left before approaching Elena. She was washing dishes in the big sink with her back turned to him. Her movements were precise and efficient like everything else she did. Jake had been thinking about Pete's photographs all afternoon, and he needed answers. "Elena," he said quietly, "we need to talk." She didn't turn around, but her shoulders tensed. "About what?" she asked. "About who you really are," Jake said. "About the Battle of Kepler, Station and Captain Elena Vasquez of the Colonial Marines." Elena's hands stopped moving in the soapy water. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the old clock on the wall. Then Elena turned around, and Jake saw tears in her dark eyes. "How did you find out?" she whispered. Jake pulled out a chair and sat down. "My friend Pete recognized you from a combat photograph. He showed me the military files. You're supposed to be dead." Elena dried her hands on a dish towel and sat across from Jake. She looked older than she had that morning, as if carrying her secret had been exhausting her. "I was supposed to die," she said. "The official reports aren't wrong. Captain Elena Vasquez did die during the siege of New Damascus. What's left is something else." "Tell me what happened," Jake said gently. Elena closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "I was leading a reconnaissance mission behind enemy lines when my squad was ambushed. The Zephyrians killed my men and captured me alive. They wanted information about human military tactics and defensive positions." Jake had heard stories about Zephyrian interrogation methods. The aliens were thorough and creative when it came to extracting information from prisoners. "How long were you captured?" he asked. 8 months. Elena said. "They tried everything. Torture, drugs, psychological manipulation, but I never broke. I never gave them what they wanted, so they decided to try something different." Elena rolled up her sleeves and showed Jake her arms. In the kitchen light, he could see thin scars running along her veins like silver threads. "They injected me with experimental compounds," she said. "Alien technology mixed with human genetics. They wanted to enhance my physical abilities and then program me to work for them." Jake felt sick thinking about what Elena had endured. "But you escaped?" "The enhancement process didn't work the way they expected," Elena continued. "It made me stronger and faster, but it also gave me fragments of memories that weren't mine. I started remembering battles I never fought and people I never met. The aliens couldn't control my mind, so they kept me in a holding facility." Elena stood up and walked to the window that looked out over the dark fields. "I escaped during a prisoner exchange. Some of our people were being traded for Zephyrian hostages, and I managed to get away in the confusion. But I couldn't go back to the military. They would have wanted to study me and figure out what the aliens had done. I would have spent the rest of my life in a laboratory." "So you came here," Jake said. Elena nodded. "I didn't know where else to go. Something in my mind told me to find this place. I had dreams about a kitchen and a man who would understand what it was like to be broken by the war. I followed those dreams until I found your diner." Jake thought about his own dreams and the voice that had been calling his name across battlefields he had never seen. "Elena," he said carefully, "were you engaged to Major Ryan Tucker?" Elena's face crumpled and she started crying. "Yes," she sobbed. "We were supposed to get married after the war. I loved him so much. Is he—" "He died on Titan Base," Jake said softly. "He saved my life during the retreat. His last words were, 'Tell Elena I'm sorry.'" Elena sank into her chair and covered her face with her hands. He used to talk about you, she said through her tears. His Sergeant Jake Morrison, who kept the squad together when everything went wrong. Ryan said you were the best soldier he ever served with. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. You remember Ryan talking about me? That's one of the memories the aliens gave me, Elena said. I think they harvested information from other human prisoners and mixed it with my own experiences. I have pieces of conversations I never had and knowledge of people I never met. That's how I knew your friend Pete's rank and why I can cook recipes I never learned. Jake was beginning to understand the scope of what had been done to Elena. The aliens had turned her into a living database of human memories and experiences. What else do you remember? He asked. I remember Ryan showing everyone pictures of me and talking about our wedding plans, Elena said. I remember him writing letters that he never got to send. I remember him asking you to promise that if something happened to him, you would find me and tell me that he loved me. Jake's chest tightened. He didn't remember making that promise, but it sounded like something Ryan would have asked for and something Jake would have agreed to. I'm telling you now, he said. Ryan loved you more than anything. He talked about you every day. Elena wiped her eyes with the dish towel. The aliens thought they were breaking my mind by giving me memories that didn't belong to me. But those memories led me to you. Maybe Ryan somehow made sure I would find the one person who would understand and help me. Before Jake could respond, they heard vehicles pulling into the parking lot outside. Car doors slammed and footsteps approached the front door. Jake looked through the window and saw two men in dark suits walking toward the diner. They moved with military precision, but something about them seemed wrong. Elena, Jake said urgently. Are you expecting anyone? Elena looked out the window and her face went white. No, she whispered, but they found me anyway. The men knocked on the front door with authority. One of them called out in a voice that carried no emotion. Federal agents, we need to speak with the owners of this establishment. Elena grabbed Jake's arm. They're not federal agents, she said quietly. There's something else. I can tell by the way they move. We need to get out of here. Jake looked at Elena's terrified face and made a decision that would change everything. No, he said firmly. We're not running. This is my home and nobody is taking you away from it. He walked to the front door and called out through the glass. We're closed for the night. Come back during business hours. One of the men pressed his face against the window. In the dim light, Jake could see that his eyes reflected light like an animal's. We know you're harboring a fugitive, the man said. Open the door or we'll open it ourselves. Jake turned to Elena. Get to the kitchen and call Pete, he said. Tell him we need help right now. Elena hesitated. Jake, you don't understand what they are. They're not human. Neither are the aliens I spent 3 years fighting, Jake replied. And I'm not letting them take you without a fight. Outside, the men were testing the door handle and examining the windows. Jake knew they wouldn't wait much longer before forcing their way inside. Whatever Elena had brought to his quiet diner was about to turn deadly, but Jake Morrison had made his choice. Some things were worth fighting for, and Elena's right to call his kitchen her home was one of them. Elena ran to the kitchen phone while Jake grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet from the stove. The men outside were no longer pretending to be patient federal agents. One of them kicked the front door hard enough to crack the wood frame while the other walked around the building looking for another way inside. Pete, Elena said when the call connected. This is Elena from the diner. Jake needs help right now. There are men here who aren't what they seem to be. Jake could hear Pete's voice through the phone asking questions, but Elena cut him off. Just get here fast and bring backup, she said before hanging up. The front window exploded inward as one of the men threw a rock through the glass. Jake saw the man's face clearly for the first time and realized Elena was right about them not being human. The features were close to human, but the proportions were slightly wrong, and the skin had a gray tint that looked unnatural in the artificial light. "Stay in the kitchen," Jake told Elena as he moved toward the broken window. "No," Elena said firmly. "You don't know what you're dealing with. These are Zephyrian infiltrators. They can change their appearance and they're much stronger than humans." The first alien climbed through the broken window while the second one continued working on the back door. Jake swung the cast iron skillet at the intruder's head, but the alien caught it with one hand and crushed the handle. Jake stumbled backward. As the alien advanced with inhuman speed, Elena appeared beside Jake with a large kitchen knife in each hand. Her whole demeanor had changed from frightened cook to trained soldier. "Get behind the counter," she ordered Jake. "Let me handle this." The alien spoke for the first time, and its voice had an odd harmonic quality that hurt Jake's ears. "Subject 779, it said to Elena. "You will come with us for processing." "My name is Elena Vasquez," she replied coldly, "and I'm not going anywhere." Elena moved like a different person than the woman who had been washing dishes 20 minutes earlier. She attacked the alien with controlled fury, using the knives like extensions of her hands. The alien was fast, but Elena seemed to anticipate its movements. They fought between the tables and chairs while Jake tried to stay out of the way. The back door burst open and the second alien entered the kitchen. This one was carrying what looked like an energy weapon that hummed with dangerous power. Jake grabbed a heavy wooden cutting board and threw it at the alien's head. The impact staggered the creature long enough for Elena to finish with the first attacker. "Jake, get down!" Elena shouted, as she picked up one of the overturned tables and hurled it at the second alien with impossible strength. The alien's weapon discharged and burned a hole through the table, but Elena was already moving. She tackled the creature, and they crashed into the commercial refrigerator hard enough to dent the metal. Jake watched in amazement as Elena fought with skills and abilities that no normal human possessed. Outside, Jake could hear more vehicles arriving. For a moment, he worried that more aliens were coming, but then he heard Pete's voice shouting orders to other soldiers. The cavalry had arrived, but the battle was far from over. Elena had disabled the second alien, but she was breathing hard and bleeding from cuts on her arms. "There will be more," she told Jake. "They don't travel in small groups." Pete kicked in what was left of the front door, followed by 4 soldiers in combat gear. "Jake, you okay?" he called out. "We're alive," Jake responded. But Elena was right about these things not being human. Pete examined the alien bodies with professional interest. "Shapeshifters," he said grimly. "Intelligence has been tracking reports of infiltrators, but this is the first time we've seen them this far inland." Elena wiped blood from a cut on her cheek. "They've been looking for me since I escaped," she said. "They can't let me live because I know too much about their enhancement experiments." More soldiers arrived and began securing the area. Pete coordinated the response, while Jake and Elena sat at one of the undamaged tables and assessed the damage to the diner. Most of the furniture was broken and there were scorch marks on the walls from the alien weapon. "I'm sorry," Elena said quietly. "I brought this to your home." Jake looked around at his destroyed restaurant and then at Elena. "This isn't your fault," he said. "And this place can be fixed. What matters is that you're safe." One of Pete's soldiers approached their table. "Sergeant Morrison," the young private said, "we found something you need to see." The soldier led them outside where other troops were examining a strange vehicle that looked like a cross between a van and a spaceship. The aliens had surveillance equipment, the soldier reported. They've been watching the diner for weeks. Elena studied the alien technology with recognition. They were planning to take me alive, she said. This equipment is designed for capture, not elimination. Pete joined them by the alien vehicle. The good news is that our people will want to study this technology, he said. The bad news is that Elena's cover is blown. They'll want to debrief her about everything she knows. What does that mean? Jake asked. It means she'll have to come with us, Pete replied, for her own protection and for national security. Elena looked at Jake with sadness in her eyes. He's right, she said. I can't stay here anymore. It's too dangerous for you and the town. Jake felt anger rising in his chest. No, he said firmly. Elena belongs here. This is her home now. Jake, Pete said gently, be reasonable. She's a military asset and she's in danger. We can protect her better than you can. Before Jake could argue, several more townspeople arrived at the diner. Old Mr. Crawford came despite his arthritis and brought his hunting rifle. Susan Martinez, who ran the grocery store, arrived with her 2 teenage sons. Even the pastor from the local church showed up ready to help. We heard shooting, Crawford said. Is everyone all right? Jake looked at the familiar faces of his neighbors and customers. These were the people who had welcomed him home from the war and supported his business. They were the people Elena had been cooking for and caring about for the past month. Elena is in trouble, Jake announced to the gathering crowd. Some people want to take her away from Cedar Falls. I say she belongs here with us. Susan Martinez stepped forward. Elena makes the best food this town has seen in 20 years, she said firmly. If she wants to stay, then she should stay. Pastor Williams nodded in agreement. This community takes care of its own, he said. Elena is one of us now. More people arrived as word spread through the small town. Within an hour, half of Cedar Falls was gathered in the diner's parking lot, ready to stand between Elena and anyone who wanted to take her away. Jake realized that Elena had found something more powerful than military protection. She had found a home worth fighting for. Pete looked at the crowd of determined civilians and shook his head. This is irregular, he said, but I suppose we can work something out. Elena will have to cooperate with debriefings and security protocols. Elena wiped tears from her eyes as she looked at the people who had come to defend her. I never had a family before, she said to Jake. Now I have a whole town. Jake put his arm around her shoulders. Welcome home, he said. Now let's figure out how to rebuild our kitchen. 2 months after the attack, Home Base Cafe reopened with a bigger kitchen and more tables. The whole town had helped rebuild the diner using insurance money and volunteer labor. Jake insisted on keeping the same yellow walls and comfortable chairs, because some things were too important to change. Elena's legal status had been resolved through a combination of military negotiation and community pressure. She received an honorable medical discharge with full benefits and the freedom to live wherever she chose. In exchange, she agreed to periodic debriefings with intelligence officers who were fascinated by her enhanced abilities and recovered memories. The enhanced strength and speed that the aliens had given Elena slowly faded over time but never completely disappeared. She could still lift heavy objects that should have been difficult, and her reflexes remained sharper than normal humans. More importantly, the fragmented memories in her mind began to organize themselves into a clearer picture of her past. Jake learned to work around Elena's unique situation. When military officials came for debriefings, he made sure they were well, fed, and treated them like any other customers. When Elena had nightmares about her captivity, Jake stayed up with her in the kitchen, making bread and talking about ordinary things until the fear passed. The diner became famous throughout the region as the place where humans had fought off alien infiltrators. Tourists and reporters came looking for excitement, but found only good food and friendly service. Jake and Elena refused to talk about the battle except to say that they were grateful for their community's support. Elena's cooking continued to improve as more of her original memories returned. She remembered her grandmother's traditional recipes and her mother's techniques for making perfect tortillas. She also retained some of the borrowed memories that had been implanted by the aliens, including Ryan's favorite dishes and stories about their planned life together. Jake struggled with guilt about inheriting memories that belonged to his dead commanding officer until Elena helped him understand that honoring Ryan's memory didn't require carrying his pain forever. They established a tradition of cooking Ryan's favorite meal on the anniversary of his death and sharing stories about the man who had brought them together in such an unusual way. One evening in late November, Elena was teaching Jake how to make a complex sauce that required perfect timing and constant attention. They worked side by side at the stove, stirring and tasting and adjusting seasonings. The kitchen was warm and filled with the sounds of simmering food and quiet conversation. This was Ryan's favorite dish, Elena said as she added herbs to the sauce. He said it reminded him of his mother's cooking, but better. Jake smiled as he watched Elena work. He had good taste, he said. In food and in women. Elena looked up from the stove. Do you think he would approve of what we've built here? She asked. Jake considered the question seriously. The diner had become more than just a restaurant. It was a gathering place for veterans who needed somewhere to feel understood. It was a safe haven for people who had been broken by life and needed time to heal. It was a symbol that home could be created anywhere people chose to care for each other. I think Ryan would be proud, Jake said finally. He always believed that the best way to honor the dead was to help the living. Elena nodded and returned her attention to the sauce. I used to think home was a place, she said. The house where I grew up or the base where I was stationed. Now I know that home is the people who choose to stand with you when trouble comes. That night after closing, Jake and Elena sat at their favorite table with cups of coffee and slices of apple pie. The diner was quiet, except for the hum of refrigerators and the tick of the old clock. Outside, snow was beginning to fall on the Montana grassland, covering the world in peaceful white. I've been thinking about expanding the menu, Elena said. Maybe adding some of the dishes I remember from my original family. Jake raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. To new recipes and old memories, he said. Elena clinked her cup against his. To finding home in unexpected places, she replied. They sat in comfortable silence watching the snow accumulate on the windows. Jake thought about the long journey that had brought them both to this moment. Elena had traveled across the galaxy and through alien experimentation to find her way to his kitchen. He had survived a war and his own demons to become someone worth finding. The enhancement procedures that had been meant to break Elena's mind had instead given her the memories she needed to locate the one person who would understand her situation. Ryan's love had somehow transcended death to guide his lost fiancée to the sergeant he had trusted with his life. What the aliens intended as torture had become an unexpected form of salvation. Elena's presence in the diner attracted other veterans who needed a place where their experiences were understood without explanation. Jake found himself becoming an unofficial counselor for soldiers struggling with their return to civilian life. The kitchen became a therapy session where healing happened over shared meals and honest conversation. The townspeople of Cedar Falls adopted Elena completely and treated the attack on the diner as an assault on their entire community. They organized a neighborhood watch program and installed security cameras, but more importantly, they made sure Elena knew she was valued and protected. Small towns understood the importance of defending what mattered. As the evening grew later, Jake began turning off lights and preparing to close. Elena finished cleaning the last of the pots and hung up her apron. They had developed an efficient routine for ending each day that required few words but much cooperation. "Same time tomorrow?" Elena asked as they prepared to go upstairs to their separate apartments. "Wouldn't miss it," Jake replied. "We've got a full reservation book and Mrs. Henderson is bringing her book club for lunch." Elena smiled and headed for the stairs. "Good night, Jake. Thank you for giving me a home." "Thank you for making it worth coming home to," Jake answered. After one off, Elena went upstairs. Jake did a final check of the kitchen and dining room. Everything was clean and ready for tomorrow's service. The diner felt peaceful and secure in a way that had nothing to do with locks or security systems. It felt like a place where people belonged. Jake turned off the last light and climbed the stairs to his own apartment. Through his window, he could see the lights of Cedar Falls scattered across the valley like earthbound stars. Somewhere out in the galaxy, there were still wars being fought and people searching for places to call home. But in this small town in HFY, Montana, two broken veterans had found something worth protecting and a community willing to help them protect it. Elena Ha.